it is something that is kind of new, and I apologize for this, guys, but I just forgot to start the screen sharing, but I have it on here now, so we'll start at this point for this. I'll take it back to the first slide here. So again, that's from the first slide, talking about the three religions: the Abrahamic faith, the monotheistic faith, the single supreme deity, and so on, and then moving into Judaism. And really the big important thing is understanding that the chief significance of the Jewish religion was that it lays the foundation for the other Abrahamic faiths of Christianity and Islam. That is important to understand. Okay, Christianity. It begins in a very distinctly Jewish cultural setting. There's a remote province in Judea in which it's incorporated into that portion becomes incorporated into the Roman Empire. And there you have a young Jewish craftsman named Jesus of Nazareth, who began his brief career of teaching and healing before he really kind of gets into trouble with local authorities. It's really one of history's most unlikely stories, the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, who, when we look at him in history's point, he's a rather obscure character, barely noted in the historical records of the time, but becomes really the basis of the world's most widely practiced religion. It's incredible to see how Jesus' small portion in terms of history booms into one of the most important men in the world because of the fact that his religion based on his life is the most widely practiced throughout. Jesus is going to go out and challenge a lot of the conventional ideals of his time. He urges the renunciation of things like wealth, self-seeking, and emphasizing the supreme importance of love and compassion as the basis for the moral life. He gives through his time a speech, the Sermon on the Mount, where he tells his followers to love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Politically, Jesus speaks very clearly on behalf of the poor. He actually associates himself with people who are poor, who are oppressed. He is there with lepers, people who are sick, the adulterous women, and the tax collectors. All of those people who were thought to be impure, but Jesus really pushes himself to them. And his teachings really galvanize many of the followers in the social movement. So Christianity really kind of portrays and is accepting of the people who are the masses, really. Even to this day, when we look at when we look at the world, the masses are not the rich; they are more so the poor. And Christianity and Christ really identified with that group of people. Jesus does not intend to establish a new religion. Rather, his goal is to revitalize the Jewish tradition. But Christianity does soon emerge as a separate faith, mainly because of St. Paul, who founded the small Christian communities that included all people who were non-Jewish as well. The good news of Jesus, Paul argues, was for everyone, okay? Jews and non-Jews alike. So the message was one of attractions of the new faith. And so Christians were at times persecuted by the Romans as well and viewed as atheists, especially the upper class groups of people, because they were pagans at that time. The persecution ends with Constantine in the 4th century when he proclaims Christianity to be the religion of Rome. And the reason he does this, well, there's several different ideas, but Christianity is on the rise because, again, we're talking about a religion that really appeals to the poor. So it was an amazing and incredible thought. And so when Christianity becomes the religion of Rome, it really sets itself off. And that is why it becomes this sort of important faith. There is hierarchical ideals behind the organization of Christianity, although it does have a very inclusive message. Okay? There are the hierarchical portions of things. The movement itself isn't unified, and it has a huge kind of geographic reach, and a part of that is because of the fact that it has Rome. And there's differences within the language, the cultural, political regime, all these things that single focus for Christian belief would be difficult. The leader of Christianity in this case becomes the Pope. All right. The problem, though, is that his leadership is questioned by the Eastern Orthodox branches of the division, and that continues to this day. And even now, the Pope is not the leader of Christianity. The Pope is the leader of Catholicism, which is a part of Christianity. So it's very different in the way that we look at it now. Next, this is a big one, and we talk about in terms of world history, Islam is going to be a very powerful group within this. But the third religion of the Abrahamic faith is Islam, and this has been quite enormous. The emergence is accompanied by the rapid creation of a huge empire that is going to stretch from Spain all the way into India. When we look at this, you also stretches down into places like East and West Africa, India, Central, Southeast Asia, within the Arab Peninsula as well. This idea is going to be called Dar al-Islam, in which civilization takes shape drawing upon Arab, Persian, Turkic, Greco-Roman, South Asian, and African cultures. This Dar al-Islam is a huge part of this. And Islam will emerge from Arabia, really from the pastoral people. And if we remember from what we talked about earlier, the pastoral people are the groups of like herders who would move around. So they practiced some semblances of agriculture in the fact that they had herds that they would use as to their advantage, but they are not agricultural in a lot of ways because they're nomadic. They move with the seasons for food. So that was one of the things that is a part of it. But this is really the group that really pushes Islam along. Other places is Mecca and Arabia, which is a huge part of those groups, and it really establishes Islam within their place. Muhammad ibn Abdullah was a trader from Mecca, and he is the catalyst for the emergence of Islam. He's a highly reflective man, very troubled by religious corruption that exists within societies that he sees. And so he often undertakes periods of withdrawal and meditation. While this is happening in one place, Muhammad heads to the arid mountains just outside of the city of Mecca. And while in the mountains, he has a religious experience that convinces him that he was Allah's messenger. And Allah in this case is God. It means God in the Arab languages, and in terms of what they're talking about. The revelations he had are going to be recorded in what is known as the Quran, right? And that becomes the sacred scriptures of Islam. So those sacred scriptures, which to this day most Muslims regard as the very words of God themselves, and it becomes the core of their faith there. So the Quran is incredibly important. So the revelations really begin around 1610, and they are put into this book as a part of it. It's very revolutionary message that Muhammad conveys. Religiously, he presents Allah, which is the Arabic word for God, as the sole divine being. He's all powerful. It presents Allah in a lot of highly regarded ways. Socially, it's revolutionary as well. The Quran denounces prevailing social practices of the increasingly prosperous Mecca. It demands social justice, lays out prescription for that implementation. when we look at it, we can see the ways in which Islam would fight against the capitalistic corporate style of world that we have today. Islam is also going to be politically revolutionary too. In this case, we see the just and moral society that Islam was a part of in terms of what we call the Ummah, and the community of the believers there, of all believers, replacing the tribal and ethnic racial identities. So within the community, women at that point were also very honored in terms of and spiritually equal amongst this. Now, not necessarily politically equal, we understand that, but very much so spiritually equal to those groups. The Ummah was to be a new and just community that was bound by a common belief, rather than any kind of territory, language, or tribe. So this Ummah that's supposed to be created really is encompassing all parts of Islam. Like Jesus, Muhammad is very threatening to establish the authorities within Mecca and forced to leave. Unlike Christ, though, he's actually in a position to resist. There's no overwhelming force that exists for Muhammad like the Romans in Christianity. So Islam is going to be able to unify, or Muhammad is going to be able to unify Arabia under their own banner, the banner of Islam. And the state will become this huge empire as Arab armies usually go out and take the offensive after Muhammad's death, especially. In many cases, you see the conversion of Islam soon following. In Persia, 80% of the population had made the transition to Muslim religious identity by 900, and the Persian culture becomes highly prestigious and influential all throughout the Islamic world. The idea behind a unified Muslim community proves very, very difficult, however. Political conflict over who should succeed Muhammad will lead to civil war. You have two different branches, and you guys have probably heard these terms before, but maybe didn't know what they were about. The Sunni and the Shia. Okay? The Sunni and the Shia are the two branches that exist for Islam. One begins as a rather purely political conflict, but acquires some deeper portions of things throughout time. And it happens all over the place. But the Sunnis and the Shia are two different sides who originally don't agree on the successor of Muhammad. And the Shia feel like they're the minority of things. But all these portions of Sunni versus Shia and such gives great rise to Islam and generates a transcontinental civilization that embraces all parts of civilizations throughout Afro-Eurasia. Again, there's that term, that we're talking about, Afro-Eurasia there. Ooh, excuse me. Next, we see a group known as the Ulama. Okay? The Ulama are scholars that serve as judges, interpreters, administrators, prayer leaders. Basically, they are the reciters of the Quran. They lead people in deciphering and understanding the Quran. And what they do is they pass on the teachings of faith that exist within the Quran. You have madrasas that offer more advanced instruction into the Quran. And a madras is really just a school that is going to teach you how to read and how to interpret the Quran for different groups of people who wanted to be a part of it. You have religious orders of the Sufis who view the worldly success of Islamic civilization as a distraction and a deviation from what Muhammad really thought at the time. Sufism pursues an interior life, tame the ego, and achieve very spiritual union with Allah. Don't worry about the outside distractions that exist, but instead bring yourself inward. So you have the mystical tendency of, in Islamic practice, that's at times very critical and more scholarly and legalistic practitioners of Sharia. The Sufis felt that many of the ulama had been compromised by their association with worldly and rather corrupt governments. So that becomes a big part of what we're looking at here. And so in the 12th and 13th centuries, the Sufis begin to organize in a variety of larger associations. Sufis orders are going to especially be very significant in the frontier regions of Islam because they follow the conquering armies or traders all throughout Central and Southeast Asia. And so you have devotional teachings. Oh, excuse me. Devotional teachings, modest kind of ways of living, and a reputation of having these supernatural powers once they hear of things like the new faith. Next, interactions and encounters. So before we have a globalized world, which we understand, the globalized world, meaning kind of our present day world, and even before Columbus's interactions across the Atlantic, we see the boundaries have transformed human societies for better and for worse. World history, when we look at it, is less about what happens to particular civilizations, for instance, like Rome falling, or the cultures that exist around it, but instead the interactions between those groups and how those groups push those other cultures and civilizations to possibly fail. All groups will have some kind of interaction in relationships with neighbors, but also in terms of relationships of a distant people. And how does that happen? A couple different ways. One setting was that of the empire. Larger states often incorporate a vast range. Just think about places like Rome, the Greeks who create Alexander's empire, the Mongol Empire, which was one of the biggest all throughout the world. All these different groups that create, excuse me. You can call me on that one, Ivan. That create these very large areas that exist to provide communication and borrowings among them. Empires also serve as arenas for exchange. So when you bring in groups of people and ideas, you can exchange all these different aspects of things. And then an Arab empire expands really after the death of Muhammad. It encompasses all parts of Egyptian, Persian, Mesopotamian, Roman, and Indian civilizations. All those places throughout exist. There's also another interaction or another mechanism for the interaction of trade as well, and that is long distance trade. The most powerful motor of historical change, and we look at the ways in which that happens. The first happens to be the commercial networks that we know as the Silk Roads. They're usually one of the most common ones that we talk about, but this is a complex operated to varying degrees over 1,500 years that link really China and the Mediterranean Sea over an overland route that exists. The sea roads, which will traverse the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, linking people between southern China and East Africa, which can then move goods as well. And then lastly, the sand roads, which link North Africa and the Mediterranean world with the land and people of West Africa. So in this, we start looking at people like Mansa Musa, who were kings, basically kings within West Africa, who have all this gold, and it comes in, and that's where we start to see the traditions exist. So you have religion, in Mansa Musa's case, making his pilgrimage to Mecca, really pursuing and pushing through things like trade throughout what are known as the sand roads that exist between North Africa and the Mediterranean Sea and West Africa. All of the exchange began well before 1200 CE and will persist well after that as well. Okay. So that is it for our